Listen here. Why don't you go back to whatever McDonald's you work at and stop playing dress-up? Officer Bradley Walsh's words cut through the morning air outside Metropolitan Police District 7. He stood blocking the employee entrance, arms crossed, smirking at the black woman in front of him. She wore what appeared to be a police uniform, but Walsh wasn't buying it for a second. The woman's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Officer Walsh," she said, reading his nameplate, "I suggest you reconsider your tone." Walsh let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, you suggest? That's rich. Ma'am, I don't know what kind of costume party you think this is, but real police work is for real police officers." Her eyes never left his face. "We'll see about that." What Walsh didn't know was that this woman was about to turn his entire world upside down with just one phone call. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone based on a single glance? Detective Captain Zara Johnson had seen this kind of behavior before. In her 15 years with the Metropolitan Police Department, she'd encountered officers like Bradley Walsh more times than she cared to count, but today was different. Today, she wasn't just another target of workplace discrimination. Today, she was here on official business. Zara adjusted the clipboard in her hand, making sure the official internal affairs seal was visible. She'd been conducting surprise inspections for 3 years now, and this precinct had been on her radar for months. The complaints had been piling up. Citizens reporting unprofessional conduct, fellow officers whispering about inappropriate comments. And at the center of it all was Officer Bradley Walsh. Walsh's personnel file made for disturbing reading. 8 years on the force, and in that time, he'd accumulated 17 formal complaints. Excessive force during routine traffic stops. Discriminatory language toward minority suspects. A pattern of behavior that somehow kept slipping through the cracks of internal review. "Look, lady," Walsh continued, his voice growing louder as other officers began to take notice. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a restricted area. You can't just waltz in here because you bought a uniform online." Zara glanced around the parking lot. Officers Miller and Davis had stopped their conversation to watch the interaction. A few civilians on the sidewalk were starting to pull out their phones. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. "Officer Walsh," Zara said calmly, "I'm here on official business. I need access to the station." "Official business?" Walsh scoffed. "What kind of official business? You selling Girl Scout cookies, raising money for your church?" The casual racism in his tone was unmistakable. Zara had heard it all before, but it never stopped stinging. The assumption that she couldn't possibly belong in law enforcement. The immediate dismissal of her authority. The way he spoke to her like she was a child playing dress-up. Officer Miller approached, curiosity written across his face. "Everything okay here, Bradley?" "Just dealing with another wannabe," Walsh replied, not taking his eyes off Zara. "Probably saw too many cop shows and thinks she can walk into a police station." Zara reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out her department identification. The photo was recent, taken just 6 months ago when she'd been promoted to captain. Her credentials were impeccable. Bronze Star for Valor, Community Service Award, commendations for excellence in internal investigations. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she said, extending the ID toward Walsh. But Walsh didn't even look at it. Instead, he knocked her hand away with a dismissive gesture. "I don't need to see fake IDs, sweetheart. What I need is for you to turn around and walk away before this becomes a real problem." The word sweetheart hung in the air like a slap. Zara felt her body camera recording every second of this interaction. Good. She wanted it all documented. "Officer Walsh, I'm giving you one last opportunity to handle this professionally," Zara said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I suggest you examine my credentials and contact your supervisor immediately." Walsh's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. "You know what? I think you're the one with the problem here. You're trespassing on police property, you're refusing to leave when asked, and you're impersonating an officer." "Impersonating an officer?" Zara repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Based on what evidence?" "Based on the fact that I know every officer in this district, and you ain't one of them." What Walsh didn't know was that Zara knew every regulation in the department handbook. She knew every procedure for handling complaints. She knew the exact protocol for surprise inspections, and she knew that everything he was doing right now was creating a paper trail that would end his career. Her radio crackled softly. Dispatch was trying to reach her, probably wondering about the status of her inspection. But Walsh and his colleagues were too focused on their own assumptions to notice the significance of a radio call coming to someone they believed was impersonating an officer. "Officer Walsh," Zara said one final time, "you're making a serious mistake." Walsh laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can fool real cops. Miller, Davis, I think we need to detain this individual for questioning." As the three officers began to circle her, Zara remained perfectly still. She'd been in situations like this before, but never as the target. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to be arrested by the very department she worked for, by officers whose behavior she was here to investigate. But she also knew something they didn't. This was all being recorded, and in a few minutes, everything would change. The situation spiraled faster than anyone could have anticipated. Officer Davis positioned himself behind Zara while Miller flanked her left side. Walsh stood directly in front of her, his chest puffed out with the kind of aggressive posture that had become his signature during confrontations. To any passerby, it looked like 3 armed officers surrounding a single woman who posed no visible threat. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them," Walsh announced loudly, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Several more officers had emerged from the station, drawn by the commotion. Zara slowly raised her hands, palms open and visible. Every movement was deliberate, professional, textbook. "Officers, I'm complying with your request. I want to remind you that this entire interaction is being recorded by multiple body cameras." "Yeah, our body cameras," Walsh sneered, "which will show exactly what they need to show." The threat was unmistakable. Zara had heard stories of footage mysteriously malfunctioning or disappearing when it didn't support the official narrative. But what Walsh didn't realize was that her own body camera was also recording, and its footage was automatically uploaded to a secure server that only Internal Affairs could access. "Officer Walsh, before this goes any further, I strongly advise you to contact your watch commander. My presence here is authorized at the highest levels of this department." Walsh's face twisted with irritation. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the one wearing a real badge here. I'm the one with actual authority, and right now, you're under investigation for criminal impersonation of a police officer." A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk. Morning commuters slowed their pace to watch the unfolding drama. Cell phones appeared, recording the scene from multiple angles. Zara noticed an elderly woman shaking her head in disgust, and a young man live-streaming on social media with the caption, "Police harassment in progress." "Criminal impersonation?" Zara repeated calmly. "Officer Walsh, what specific evidence do you have to support that charge?" "The evidence is standing right in front of me. You're not a cop. Real cops don't look like you." The words hung in the air like a confession. Miller and Davis exchanged uncomfortable glances, but neither spoke up. This was Walsh's show, and they were just following his lead. "What do real cops look like, Officer Walsh?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the growing absurdity of the situation. Walsh realized he'd said too much. "Real cops have real training. Real cops have real badges. Real cops don't show up at police stations pretending to be something they're not." "I see. And you've determined all of this without examining my credentials, without contacting a supervisor, and without following any standard verification procedures." "I don't need procedures to spot a fake." Sergeant Mike Torres had been watching from the station entrance, growing increasingly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. He approached the group, his expression troubled. "Walsh, what's the situation here?" "Sarge, we've got a code 843. Subject is impersonating an officer and refusing to leave police property." Torres looked at Zara, taking in her immaculate uniform, her professional bearing, and her calm demeanor under pressure. Something didn't add up. "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Zara reached slowly toward her pocket, making sure her movements were visible to all the cameras. She withdrew her department ID and extended it toward Torres. But Walsh intercepted it, snatching the ID from her hand before Torres could examine it. "Sarge, don't waste your time. It's obviously fake. Look at this photo. Does this look like police department quality to you?" Torres frowned. "Walsh, let me see that." Trust me, Sarge, I know a fake when I see one. This whole thing is a scam. Probably trying to get inside the station to steal something or case the joint for her criminal friends. The casual accusation of criminality based on nothing but assumptions made several bystanders gasp audibly. The young man with the live stream shook his head and increased his commentary volume so viewers could hear his outrage. Zara's radio crackled again. This time, the transmission was clearer. Detective Captain Johnson, please respond regarding status of District 7 inspection. Walsh quickly reached out and turned the volume down on her radio. Nice try. You can buy police radios online these days. Real convincing. But Torres had heard enough of the transmission to raise an eyebrow. Walsh, maybe we should slow this down and... Sarge, respectfully, I've got this under control. We need to get this individual processed and off the street before she cons someone else. Zara watched the interaction with professional interest. She'd seen this dynamic before during her investigations. Senior officers who might have better judgment allowing subordinates to take the lead because it was easier than confronting problematic behavior. Torres clearly had doubts, but he wasn't willing to override Walsh's authority in front of witnesses. Officer Walsh, Zara said quietly, I want to be very clear about something. When this is over, when the truth comes out, you're going to wish you had handled this differently. Is that a threat? Walsh snapped, his hand moving reflexively toward his weapon. It's not a threat. It's a professional observation based on my experience with officer misconduct cases. Officer misconduct cases? What would you know about officer misconduct cases? Zara smiled slightly. More than you might think. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown larger. Someone had called it in to local news, and a reporter was already en route. Social media posts were multiplying, with hashtags starting to trend. The department's public relations nightmare was just beginning, but Walsh was too focused on proving his point to notice. All right, that's enough, Walsh announced. Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal impersonation of a police officer, trespassing on police property, and disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct? Zara asked. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't made any threatening gestures, and I've complied with every reasonable request. Your whole presence here is disorderly. You're causing a disturbance, you're wasting police resources, and you're creating a public safety hazard. Torres stepped forward. Walsh, maybe we should... Sarge, I need you to trust me on this one. I know what I'm doing. But as Walsh reached for his handcuffs, Zara made one final attempt to de-escalate. Officer Walsh, I'm going to ask you one more time to contact your watch commander. Tell them that Internal Affairs Captain Zara Johnson is here for a scheduled inspection. They'll confirm my identity and authorization. Walsh paused for just a moment. The specificity of her statement, the confidence in her voice, the way she used exact titles and procedures, it was almost convincing. Almost. Nice try, sweetheart. But I wasn't born yesterday. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked into place around Zara's wrists, she felt a familiar mixture of professional disappointment and personal hurt. Disappointed because this kind of behavior was exactly why her department needed better oversight. Hurt because, despite years of experience, it still stung to be treated as less than human. Officer Walsh, she said as he tightened the cuffs, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how certain you were. Remember how convinced you felt that you were doing the right thing. Save the speeches for your lawyer, Walsh replied, guiding her toward a patrol car. But as they walked across the parking lot, Zara's radio crackled one more time. This time, the transmission was crystal clear. All units, be advised that Detective Captain Johnson should have arrived at District 7 for her inspection. Please confirm her status immediately. Walsh quickly reached over and turned off her radio entirely. Enough with the theater. What he didn't realize was that dispatch was now actively looking for her. And when internal affairs captains go missing during official inspections, people start asking very serious questions very quickly. The patrol car door slammed shut behind her, but Zara wasn't worried. She was angry, yes. Disappointed, absolutely. But worried? Not at all. Because she knew something that Officer Walsh was about to learn the hard way. The truth has a way of catching up with people who try to ignore it. The ride to the processing area took less than 3 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Zara sat in the back of the patrol car, her hands cuffed behind her back, watching familiar streets pass by through bulletproof glass. She'd made this same journey countless times as an officer, but never as a detainee. Officer Davis drove while Walsh rode shotgun, occasionally glancing back at her with satisfaction. "You picked the wrong precinct to run your little scam," he said through the partition. "We don't play games here." Zara remained silent. Every word out of Walsh's mouth was being recorded by the car's audio system, creating an ever-growing pile of evidence that would eventually bury him. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was to let problematic officers talk themselves into unemployment. At the station's rear entrance, Walsh made a show of helping her out of the car, his grip unnecessarily firm on her arm. "Watch your head," he said with mock concern, guiding her toward the processing door. Inside, the booking area buzzed with its usual activity. Sergeant Rosa Martinez looked up from her desk as they entered, her eyebrows rising at the sight of a woman in a police uniform being brought in wearing handcuffs. "What do we have here?" Martinez asked, setting down her coffee. "Criminal impersonation of a police officer," Walsh announced proudly, "plus trespassing and disorderly conduct. Subject was attempting to gain unauthorized access to the station using fake credentials." Martinez studied Zara's face, taking in her calm demeanor and professional bearing. Something felt off about this arrest. "Did you run her ID through the system?" "Didn't need to. It was obviously fake. I can spot a con artist from a mile away." "Walsh, protocol requires that we verify all identification before processing any impersonation charges. You know that." Walsh's jaw tightened. "Sarge Martinez, respectfully, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I think I can tell the difference between a real cop and someone playing dress-up." Martinez turned to Zara. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Detective Captain Zara Johnson, Internal Affairs Division, badge number 4792. The specificity of her response made Martinez pause. Con artists usually kept their stories vague to avoid contradictions. This woman was providing exact details that could be easily verified. "Captain Johnson," Martinez repeated. "You're claiming to be a captain?" "I'm not claiming anything. I am Captain Johnson. I was conducting a scheduled inspection of this precinct when Officer Walsh decided to arrest me without cause." Walsh laughed harshly. "Scheduled inspection? Come on, Sarge. She's good, I'll give her that. But we both know Internal Affairs doesn't send captains to do surprise inspections. They send low-level investigators." What Walsh didn't know was that Martinez had worked with Internal Affairs before. She knew their procedures, and she knew that high-ranking officers absolutely did conduct surprise inspections when serious allegations were involved. "Ma'am, you said you're here for an inspection. Do you have any documentation?" Zara nodded toward her clipboard, which Walsh was still holding. "Officer Walsh confiscated my inspection orders along with my credentials. They're in the folder attached to that clipboard." Martinez looked at Walsh expectantly. "Let me see the paperwork." Walsh hesitated. He'd been so focused on proving that Zara was fake that he hadn't actually examined any of her documents. "The paperwork's fake too, Sarge. It's all part of the con." "Then it won't hurt to look at it, will it?" Reluctantly, Walsh handed over the clipboard. Martinez opened the folder and immediately froze. The letterhead was authentic department stationery. The inspection order bore the signature of Commissioner Thompson himself, and the date was today's date. "Walsh," Martinez said slowly, "these documents look legitimate." "They can't be legitimate. Look at her. Does she look like a police captain to you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Martinez's expression hardened. "What exactly is that supposed to mean, Officer Walsh?" Walsh realized he'd stepped in it again. I mean she doesn't look familiar. I know most of the brass in this district." "Internal Affairs operates out of headquarters, Walsh. They don't spend time in district stations." A detention officer named Kim Carter had been listening to the exchange while processing other arrestees. "Excuse me, Sergeant Martinez. The subject is requesting her phone call." Walsh whipped around. "She doesn't get a phone call until booking is complete." Martinez frowned. "Walsh, all detainees are entitled to a phone call regardless of charges. That's basic constitutional law." "But what if she's part of a larger conspiracy? What if she calls her accomplices?" "Her accomplices?" Martinez couldn't hide her incredulity. "Officer Walsh, You arrested one woman carrying paperwork. What kind of conspiracy are you imagining? Zara spoke up for the first time since entering the building. Sergeant Martinez, I'd like to exercise my right to a phone call. I believe a single conversation will clear up this misunderstanding very quickly. Martinez nodded. Of course. Officer Carter, please escort the detainee to the phone. Her name isn't Captain anything, Walsh protested. Don't let her scam you too, Sarge. But Martinez was already having serious doubts about this arrest. The documentation looked authentic. The woman's demeanor was completely professional, and Walsh's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. As Carter led Zara to the phone bank, Walsh continued his protests. This is a mistake, Sarge. You're letting her contact her criminal network. When this blows up, don't say I didn't warn you. Zara picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. The call connected after 2 rings. Commissioner Thompson's office. This is Linda. Linda, this is Captain Johnson. I need to speak with the commissioner immediately. It's urgent. Captain Johnson? Aren't you supposed to be conducting an inspection at District 7? That's exactly why I need to speak with him. The conversation was brief and professional, but Walsh could see Martinez straining to overhear. Whatever was being said, it didn't sound like criminal conspiracy planning. After 3 minutes, Zara hung up the phone and turned to Martinez. Sergeant, I suggest you prepare for a phone call. And I suggest Officer Walsh prepare for a very difficult conversation. Walsh's confidence was beginning to crack, but he doubled down. More theater. She's probably calling her lawyer or her bail bondsman. But Martinez was looking at Zara with growing recognition. Something about her face was familiar. Had she seen her picture before? In a department newsletter, maybe? Or a commendation ceremony? The phone at Martinez's desk rang. She looked at the caller ID and her face went pale. District 7, Sergeant Martinez speaking. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Commissioner Thompson himself. And he did not sound happy. Sergeant Martinez, this is Commissioner Thompson. I understand you have Detective Captain Zara Johnson in custody. The words hit the booking area like a thunderclap. Martinez's face drained of color as she gripped the phone receiver. Around the room, conversation stopped. Officer Carter froze mid-step. Even the detained suspects looked up from their benches, but Officer Walsh heard only what he wanted to hear. See? He said triumphantly. She's obviously been calling people pretending to be this Captain Johnson person. Probably has a whole network of accomplices. Commissioner, my ass. She probably called some friend to impersonate Officer Walsh, Martinez whispered harshly, covering the phone's mouthpiece. Shut up, right now. The deadly serious tone in her voice finally penetrated Walsh's overconfidence. He looked around the room and noticed that everyone was staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to horror. Martinez returned to the call. Yes, Commissioner, she's here. She was arrested by Officer Walsh approximately 20 minutes ago. On what charges? The Commissioner's voice was loud enough that several people could hear it through the receiver. Criminal impersonation of a police officer, trespassing, and disorderly conduct, sir. The silence that followed was deafening. When Commissioner Thompson finally spoke again, his voice was ice cold. Sergeant Martinez, I want you to listen very carefully. Detective Captain Zara Johnson is one of the most decorated officers in our department. She has 15 years of exemplary service. She was conducting an authorized surprise inspection of your facility this morning at my direct request. And apparently, one of your officers just arrested her for impersonating herself. Walsh felt his knees go weak. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. The woman standing 10 feet away, still wearing handcuffs, couldn't possibly be a police captain. Could she? Furthermore, the Commissioner continued, Captain Johnson leads our Internal Affairs Division. She specializes in investigating officer misconduct, discrimination, and excessive force complaints. The irony of this situation is not lost on me. Martinez looked at Zara with a mixture of awe and terror. Internal Affairs. The woman Walsh had arrested was Internal Affairs. The woman he'd insulted and degraded and accused of criminal behavior was the person responsible for investigating exactly that kind of behavior. Sir, Martinez managed, what are your orders? Release Captain Johnson immediately. Remove those handcuffs and treat her with the respect her rank and service deserve. And I want a full incident report on my desk within the hour. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead. Martinez stared at the phone for a moment, then looked at Walsh. His face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 30 seconds. "Officer Carter," Martinez said quietly, "please remove Captain Johnson's restraints." As the handcuffs came off, Zara rubbed her wrists and straightened her uniform. She'd remained silent during the entire phone call, letting the truth speak for itself. Now she turned to face Walsh directly. "Officer Walsh," she said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "I believe you wanted to see my credentials?" She reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew her badge wallet, opening it to reveal her captain's bars and internal affairs identification. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, authentic and undeniable. Walsh stared at the badge as if it might disappear if he blinked. But you... I don't understand." "What don't you understand, Officer Walsh? That a black woman can hold a position of authority in law enforcement? That someone who doesn't look like you might outrank you? Or that your assumptions about people might sometimes be wrong?" The questions hung in the air like indictments. Around the room, other officers had gathered to witness the aftermath of what was already being called the biggest screw-up in District 7's history. Sergeant Martinez approached Zara cautiously. "Captain Johnson, I apologize profusely for this incident. If there's anything I can do..." Zara held up a hand. "Sergeant Martinez, you followed proper procedure once you had all the facts. You're not the problem here." Her eyes never left Walsh's face. "The problem is systemic assumptions and unchecked bias." Walsh finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Captain, I thought... I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You saw what you expected to see based on your preconceptions. You refused to examine my credentials. You dismissed my radio communications. You ignored every piece of evidence that contradicted your assumptions." Officer Miller and Davis had arrived, drawn by the commotion. When they saw Zara's badge and Captain's bars, their faces went ashen. They'd been complicit in the arrest of an internal affairs captain. Their careers were likely over. "Ma'am," Miller stammered, "we were just following Walsh's lead. We didn't know..." "Officers Miller and Davis," Zara said without turning to look at them, "you had eyes and ears. You chose to follow rather than think. That's a choice, not an excuse." The booking area had become completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of radio chatter. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Walsh made one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "Captain, surely you understand the confusion. It's not common to see... we don't usually..." "We don't usually see what, Officer Walsh? Black women in positions of authority? Black women who know police procedure? Black women who deserve basic professional respect?" Each question was like a hammer blow. Walsh realized that every word out of his mouth was making things worse, but he couldn't seem to stop himself. "I just meant that Internal Affairs usually sends advance notice before inspections." Zara smiled coldly. "Officer Walsh, the whole point of a surprise inspection is that it's a surprise. And based on what I've witnessed this morning, my decision to conduct an unannounced visit was absolutely justified." The sound of approaching sirens could be heard outside. Commissioner Thompson was arriving, along with what sounded like multiple vehicles. This incident was about to become very official. Very quickly. "Captain," Martinez said nervously, "is there anything we should prepare for the commissioner's arrival?" Zara looked around the room at the assembled officers, taking in their faces, their body language, their obvious discomfort. "Sergeant Martinez, I suggest you prepare for a very thorough review of this precinct's training procedures, supervision protocols, and complaint history." She turned back to Walsh one final time. "And Officer Walsh, I suggest you prepare for a career change." The sirens were getting louder. In a few minutes, the full weight of the police department's command structure would descend on District 7. And at the center of it all would be the woman Walsh had dismissed as a fake, a con artist, someone who didn't belong. But she did belong. In fact, she was about to prove just how much she belonged by ending his career with the same phone call he'd mocked as theater. The irony was perfect. And for Zara Johnson, it was just another day at the office. The first black SUV pulled into the District 7 parking lot exactly 14 minutes after Commissioner Thompson's phone call. The second and third vehicles followed within 30 seconds, disgorging a small army of brass, internal affairs investigators, and departmental attorneys. The cavalry had arrived, and they looked ready for war. Commissioner Thompson emerged from the lead vehicle like a man on a mission. At 58, he was a veteran of 35 years in law enforcement, and he'd seen every kind of departmental crisis imaginable. But this one was special. This one involved his hand-picked internal affairs captain being arrested by the very officers she was investigating. Captain Johnson met him at the station entrance, her uniform still crisp despite her ordeal. "Commissioner?" "Captain Johnson, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, sir, but we have a significant problem." Thompson's jaw tightened. "I'm aware. Where's the officer who arrested you?" "Inside, sir, along with 2 officers who assisted and several witnesses." "Good. Let's get this sorted out." The commissioner's entrance into the booking area was like a force of nature. Conversations stopped. Officers snapped to attention. Even the detained suspects seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. "Where's Sergeant Martinez?" Thompson demanded. "Here, sir," Martinez replied, stepping forward with obvious nervousness. "Conference room, now. I want Officer Walsh, the 2 officers who assisted him, and Captain Johnson. Everyone else clear the area." The procession to the conference room felt like a funeral march. Walsh walked as if in a trance, still unable to fully process what had happened. Miller and Davis flanked him, their faces pale with the realization that their careers were likely over. Thompson closed the conference room door and gestured for everyone to sit. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Before we begin," Thompson announced, "I want everyone to understand that this conversation is being recorded. Everything said here will become part of an official investigation. Officer Walsh, you have the right to have union representation present." Walsh shook his head numbly. I don't think I need—" "Trust me," Thompson said coldly. "You need representation, but we're proceeding regardless." He opened a thick folder and spread its contents across the conference table. Body camera footage screenshots, witness statements, audio transcripts. The evidence of Walsh's behavior was overwhelming and undeniable. "Officer Walsh, I've reviewed the preliminary report of this morning's incident. According to multiple sources, you prevented Captain Johnson from entering this facility, refused to examine her credentials, ignored her radio communications, and ultimately arrested her without probable cause." Walsh stared at the evidence spread before him. Screenshots from body camera footage showed him knocking Johnson's ID from her hands. Audio transcripts captured his dismissive comments and casual racism. Witness statements described his aggressive posture and inappropriate remarks. "Sir, I thought she was impersonating an officer. I was protecting the integrity of this facility." By refusing to verify her identification? By ignoring standard protocols? By making assumptions based on what exactly? The question hung in the air like a trap. Walsh realized that any answer he gave would incriminate him further. Captain Johnson spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Commissioner, may I share what I observed during Officer Walsh's interaction with me?" "Please proceed, Captain." "Officer Walsh made several statements that suggest a pattern of discriminatory thinking. He told me to go back to McDonald's and stop playing dress-up. He referred to me as sweetheart multiple times despite my objections. He stated that real cops don't look like me. And when asked what real cops look like, he was unable to provide any criteria beyond appearance." Thompson's expression darkened with each revelation. "Officer Walsh, do you dispute Captain Johnson's account?" Walsh looked around the room desperately, seeking some escape from the trap he'd built for himself. "Sir, I was just trying to maintain security. Maybe my language was unfortunate, but my intentions were good." "Your intentions were good?" Thompson's voice rose slightly. "Officer Walsh, Captain Johnson is a 15-year veteran with commendations for valor, community service, and excellence in investigation. She has a master's degree in criminal justice and has completed advanced training in bias recognition and de-escalation techniques. She was here conducting an authorized inspection of this facility, and you arrested her because she doesn't look like your idea of a police officer." Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Commissioner, if I may, we were just following Walsh's lead. We trusted his judgment. Officer Miller, you have eyes, you have training, you have a responsibility to think independently. When you saw Captain Johnson's professional demeanor, her knowledge of police procedures, her calm response to escalating aggression, did it not occur to you that something was wrong with this arrest? Miller had no answer. The truth was that he'd been uncomfortable from the beginning, but it had been easier to follow Walsh than to challenge him. Thompson turned to Davis. Officer Davis, according to the report, you were the one who actually applied the handcuffs. What was your justification for restraining a suspect who was fully compliant and showed no signs of resistance? Davis mumbled something inaudible. Speak up, Officer Davis. I was following orders, sir. Following orders to violate someone's civil rights? Following orders to ignore departmental procedures? Following orders to participate in what amounts to false imprisonment? The weight of their situation was finally sinking in for all three officers. This wasn't just a disciplinary matter. This was a federal civil rights violation. This was career-ending misconduct. This was the kind of incident that made national news and triggered Department of Justice investigations. Thompson opened another folder, this one containing Walsh's personnel file. Officer Walsh, in your 8 years with this department, you've accumulated 17 formal complaints. Excessive force. Discriminatory language. Inappropriate conduct during traffic stops. Failure to follow procedure. Each time you've received counseling or minor discipline. Each time you've promised to do better. And each time the behavior has continued. He spread the complaint forms across the table like playing cards. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled over for a broken taillight, says you asked her about her immigration status despite her having a valid driver's license. Mr. Thompson stopped for speeding, says you used racial slurs during the encounter. Ms. Washington, reporting a domestic disturbance, says you questioned whether she was telling the truth because women like her frequently lie to police. Each complaint was a nail in Walsh's professional coffin. The pattern was undeniable, damning, and well documented. Sir, Walsh said weakly, those complaints were all investigated. I was cleared each time. You were cleared because the investigating officers gave you the benefit of the doubt. Because complaint investigations in this department have historically been inadequate. Because the system protected officers instead of holding them accountable. Thompson's voice carried the weight of institutional failure. That ends today. Captain Johnson opened her own folder. Commissioner, my inspection of this precinct was prompted by a significant increase in citizen complaints over the past 6 months. Officer Walsh accounts for 40% of those complaints, despite representing only 8% of this precinct's personnel. The mathematics of discrimination were stark and undeniable. Walsh wasn't just a problem officer, he was a crisis waiting to happen. Furthermore, Johnson continued, my review of body camera footage from the past year shows a pattern of disparate treatment based on race, gender, and perceived socioeconomic status. Officer Walsh consistently uses different language, different tones, and different levels of aggression, depending on the demographics of the people he encounters. She produced a tablet and began playing video clips. Walsh speaking respectfully to a white businessman during a traffic stop. Walsh using aggressive language with a black teenager in the exact same circumstances. Walsh offering assistance to a white woman reporting a crime. Walsh questioning the credibility of a Latina woman making an identical report. The evidence was overwhelming, systematic, and professionally damning. Thompson closed the folders and looked directly at Walsh. Officer Walsh, based on the evidence presented and your actions this morning, I am placing you on immediate administrative suspension pending a full investigation. Your badge and weapon will be surrendered before you leave this building. Walsh's face crumpled. Sir, please, this job is all I have. I can change, I can do better. Officer Walsh, you've had 8 years and 17 complaints to do better. Instead, you arrested a superior officer because she didn't match your prejudices. That's not a mistake. That's not poor judgment. That's a fundamental character flaw that makes you unsuitable for law enforcement. Miller and Davis watched in horror as their colleagues' career disintegrated before their eyes. They knew they were next. Officers Miller and Davis, Thompson continued, you are both suspended for 30 days without pay. You will undergo mandatory retraining in civil rights, de-escalation, and independent decision-making. Any future incidents of this nature will result in termination. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of normal police work continuing outside. 3 careers had been irrevocably altered in the span of an hour. Thompson stood up. This incident represents a failure at multiple levels. It's a failure of training, supervision, and culture. It's a failure to recognize and address problematic behavior before it escalates. And it's a failure to protect the very communities we've sworn to serve. He looked around the room one final time. Captain Johnson, please continue your inspection. I want a full report on this precinct's operations, training records, and complaint handling procedures. If there are systemic problems, I want them identified and corrected immediately. Johnson nodded. Yes, sir. As Thompson prepared to leave, Walsh made one final plea. Commissioner, what about my family? What about my pension? I've got 15 years left until retirement. Thompson paused at the door. Officer Walsh, you should have thought about your family before you decided that badge gave you the right to mistreat people based on their appearance. Actions have consequences. This is yours. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Walsh's career was over. Miller and Davis faced uncertain futures, and Captain Johnson still had work to do. But for the first time in 8 years, the citizens of District 7 were a little bit safer from the kind of police misconduct that had just destroyed 3 careers in a single morning. Justice, it turned out, could be swift when the evidence was overwhelming and the will to act was finally present. The formal disciplinary hearing took place 48 hours later in the department's downtown headquarters. The conference room was packed with brass, union representatives, legal counsel, and members of the press who had gotten wind of the story. What had started as a routine morning shift had become a department-wide reckoning. Captain Johnson sat at the witness table, her testimony calm and methodical. She recounted every detail of her encounter with Officer Walsh, from his initial dismissive comment to the moment the handcuffs were removed. Her words carried the weight of 15 years of professional credibility. The pattern of behavior I witnessed from Officer Walsh represents a fundamental failure to uphold the constitutional rights of citizens, she testified. His actions were not the result of confusion or misunderstanding. They were the result of deeply held biases that made him unfit for law enforcement. Walsh's attorney, a seasoned police union representative named Frank Morrison, attempted to paint the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding. My client made an error in judgment, but his intentions were to protect department security. Officer Walsh has served this community for 8 years without a major incident. Commissioner Thompson's response was swift and decisive. Counselor, your client has 17 documented complaints in his personnel file. That's not an unblemished record. That's a pattern of misconduct that this department failed to address adequately. The hearing reviewed the mountain of evidence that had accumulated over just 2 days. Body camera footage from the arrest, audio recordings of Walsh's discriminatory comments, witness statements from civilians and fellow officers, a comprehensive analysis of Walsh's complaint history dating back to his first year on the force. But the most damning evidence came from Captain Johnson's expanded investigation of District 7. Her team had uncovered a culture of casual racism and unchecked bias that went far beyond Walsh's individual behavior. We found evidence of a systemic problem, Johnson reported. Officers routinely use different standards for different communities, supervisors failing to address obvious red flags in officer behavior, a complaint process that discouraged citizens from reporting misconduct and failed to hold officers accountable when they did. The numbers were staggering. Minority citizens were 3 times more likely to be searched during traffic stops. Use of force incidents disproportionately involved Black and Latino suspects. Complaint investigations consistently favored officer testimony over civilian accounts, even when video evidence suggested otherwise. The 3-member disciplinary panel deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, their faces were grim but determined. Officer Bradley Walsh, announced Chief Hearing Officer Margaret Carter, this panel finds you guilty of violating departmental policies regarding professional conduct, equal treatment of citizens, and abuse of authority. Your actions on the morning in question were not only unprofessional but potentially criminal. Walsh sat motionless as his fate was sealed. Furthermore, Your 8-year pattern of discriminatory behavior represents a fundamental incompatibility with the values and mission of this police department. Effective immediately, you are terminated from employment with the Metropolitan Police Department. Your pension benefits are forfeited, and you are permanently barred from law enforcement employment in this jurisdiction. The gavel came down with finality. Walsh's career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future uncertain. Morrison immediately announced plans to appeal, but everyone in the room knew it was futile. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pattern too clear, the department's liability too great. Officers Miller and Davis received 30-day suspensions without pay, mandatory bias training, and 1-year probationary status. Any future incidents would result in immediate termination. Their careers were damaged but salvageable, contingent on demonstrating real change. But the biggest changes came at the institutional level. Commissioner Thompson announced a comprehensive reform package that would reshape how the department handled bias complaints and officer misconduct. Effective immediately, Thompson declared, all bias-related complaints will be investigated by internal affairs rather than local supervisors. Officers with multiple complaints will undergo mandatory psychological evaluation and bias training. And any officer who interferes with a legitimate internal affairs investigation will face automatic termination. The reforms went further. Body camera footage would be randomly audited for signs of disparate treatment. Community oversight panels would review use of force incidents. Regular bias training would become mandatory for all personnel, from rookie officers to senior command staff. Captain Johnson was promoted to Deputy Commissioner of Professional Standards, giving her department-wide authority to implement reforms and investigate misconduct. Her first act was to create a rapid response team for bias complaints, ensuring that future incidents would be addressed within hours rather than months. The ripple effects extended beyond the police department. The local NAACP praised the swift action and comprehensive reforms. Community leaders who had spent years fighting police misconduct finally felt heard. And other police departments across the country began examining their own complaint processes and officer training programs. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Word spread quickly through law enforcement circles about what happened to Officer Walsh. The message was clear. The days of consequence-free bias were over. Officers who couldn't treat all citizens with equal respect would find themselves looking for new careers. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the system had demonstrated its capacity for self-correction when leadership had the courage to act. 6 months later, Detective Captain Zara Johnson stood in the same parking lot where her ordeal had begun. But everything had changed. The hostile atmosphere that once permeated District 7 had been replaced by something resembling actual professionalism. The reforms were working. Bias complaints had dropped by 60% across the department. Use of force incidents involving minority citizens had decreased significantly. Community trust surveys showed the highest approval ratings in over a decade. Most importantly, officers were finally being held accountable for their actions. The culture change has been remarkable, Johnson reflected during a recent interview. Officers know they're being watched, evaluated, and held to high standards. But more than that, they're starting to understand that treating all citizens with dignity and respect isn't just policy, it's the foundation of effective policing. Officer Walsh's appeal had been denied at every level. He now worked as a security guard at a shopping mall, earning a fraction of his former salary and facing a lifetime ban from law enforcement. His story had become a cautionary tale told in police academies across the country. Miller and Davis had completed their retraining and returned to duty with notably improved performance records. The experience had been a wake-up call that fundamentally changed how they approached their jobs. They became advocates for the very reforms they had once resisted. "I was wrong," Officer Miller admitted during a voluntary interview. "I let someone else do my thinking for me, and I almost destroyed my career in the process. Now I understand that following orders doesn't excuse participating in discrimination." The changes extended far beyond individual officers. District 7 had become a model for community policing, with regular town halls, civilian oversight panels, and partnerships with local organizations. Crime rates had actually decreased as community cooperation increased. Captain Johnson's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Commissioner Thompson. "Another department wants to implement our reforms. Can you consult with them next month?" She smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. The work continues." The work did continue because changing institutional culture was an ongoing process, not a one-time event. But the foundation had been laid. Officers knew that bias and discrimination would not be tolerated. Communities knew that their complaints would be taken seriously. And leaders knew that swift, decisive action was both possible and necessary. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Officer Walsh's attempt to humiliate and marginalize Captain Johnson had backfired spectacularly, triggering the very reforms he would have opposed. His career had ended, but the positive changes he inadvertently sparked would protect thousands of citizens for years to come. As Johnson walked back toward the station, the same entrance Walsh had blocked 6 months earlier, she reflected on the power of persistence and professionalism. She could have responded to his aggression with anger. She could have let his bias derail her mission. Instead, she had remained calm, collected evidence, and let the system work. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is simply refusing to let it break you. The parking lot was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. Officers nodded respectfully as they passed her. Citizens approached the building without fear or hesitation. Children playing nearby waved at the officers they now saw as protectors rather than threats. This was what policing could look like when bias was eliminated and accountability was real. This was what justice looked like when leaders had the courage to act. And this was just the beginning. What about you? Have you ever witnessed bias in your community? Have you seen situations where someone's assumptions led them to make terrible mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing over prejudice. Together, we can build the change we want to see in our communities. Because when good people stand up and demand better, better is exactly what we get.
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.